All right, we're live with Epic Catfish, and right before the seminar starts, he can talk to you. They can hear.
Thank you, Kevin. My name's Tim Scott, and I am a big catfish-aholic.
So if you have any questions for Tim,
That
you
is
can
what
ask
makes me
them,
tick. That's what I
and,
love. That's what I've
I'll ask for
always
you.
loved. And at one time, I didn't know how to do it at all. I was fishing the wrong spots, using the wrong size baits, using the wrong thing. I thought, man, if I could get to these backwaters, I'm going to find some giant fish. And I had no idea what I was doing. There wasn't, 30 years ago, there wasn't this kind of great stuff. Matter of fact, now that I'm reminded of this, let's have a big hand for Steve Douglas to put something together like this.
Introduce you. Go ahead. Here you go. Here you go.
And I do believe Steve's getting ready.
All right, thanks for coming to the conference. This seminar I'm pretty excited for. Mr. Tim, for you guys that don't know Tim, Tim's been around for probably 20 years. He had a company or a magazine called ProCats.
Steve is just introducing Tim.
20 years ago, he was already in it. So he's really the godfather, I guess, up there. But very knowledgeable. He's starting to be dubbed the professor of catfishing. So let's give him a round of applause.
Timothy Catfish.
Thank you, Steve. And Steve's done a great thing. There's been people along, in the last 30 years try to put something like this together, and this is the one that really went. So I'm still happy that Steve asked me to be here, and that this thing is
all
great.
right, guys.
We've
Here we
got
go.
rods and reels that were never available years ago. We had Zebco 33s and pistol grip handles and fiberglass rods and tiny little white and red bobbers and little bitty hooks. And I used to have to stack, half-ounce egg sinkers just to get going. I mean, stack them this long, and then they'd go everywhere like you're shooting pool, and they'd get caught on everything, and it was terrible. So I won't bore you with all that stuff because Steve said I can only have an hour, and that's bad because I'm going to try to squeeze all this stuff in. So Steve called me, and he said, what are you going to talk about? I said, I could talk about a lot of things. What do you want me to talk about? He goes, I don't know. It's up to you. And I said, okay, I'm going to try to talk about big fish mentality. Raise your hand if you've ever seen Epic Catfish on YouTube. Okay, about half of you. So you guys know what I'm talking about. And for the rest of you, I'm going to kind of describe this because a lot of people have a lot of different fishing situations. They've got smaller waters, they got lakes, they got little rivers, they got all this stuff. They don't have giant rivers available to them, and sometimes they don't want to. They don't want to catch a big, giant, mega fish. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but I'm going to talk about what I like to do. So when I talk about a fish like this, for most part of the country, it's a pretty good fish. I don't really sneeze at it, but believe it or not, I do not want to catch this fish. I don't, because I want to spend time with my baits in the water in the right areas that I've learned over 30 years to be able to contact monsters like this. Now, this is a 2-scale representation. It is 5'2" long and 45 inches around. And I caught this fish not in a lake. I caught it in the Mississippi River on some pretty serious current. And that's what I've done. I've worked my whole life to try to figure out the things to do and not to do when we're talking about big catfish. Now, if you've watched my lives, the live shows that Sean and I do, by the way, my fishing partner right there and greatest friend on the planet, we put him on some giant fish, and it was this very rod right here. And he sets the hook. It was sideways, which I'm going to explain in a little bit. And it took that rod, and he didn't know how big it was, and you'll understand why in a second. And it went down about 50, 60 yards. It went over. I'm starting to clear rods, and then all of a sudden it got underneath the boat. And he's like, I got this handled. And all of a sudden when he put the pressure to it, it just started, rip and drag on that burning shark reel right there. And it went upstream. How many times in current do fish go upstream? And I could tell by the way the movement, and I'm gonna try to get to that too, so that you can tell how big a fish is almost the second it bites. But it went upstream and got into the anchor rope, and Sean made some noises that I've never heard a human being make. Because, he lives for that stuff too. It's close to his heart. It's close to mine. So let's quit talking about this. you'll hear guys talk about baits a lot. And I think baits is actually a lesser part of the equation. And when I think about big catfish, I want to fish a major river. I want to fish a major lake. I want to fish some depth. I want to fish something that, what I call epic spots. That may be where the current is as fast as it is in the entire pool. Maybe you got a 28-mile pool. And I'm going to say, okay, I want that into that wing dike. I want over top of that wing dike with 14 foot of water. And I'm just trying to describe the kind of things that we try to do. And so I've had to learn how to tackle up for it. And I brought some ancient stuff. This thing's probably 25 years old. And I bought it at Bluff City Tackle. It is a pretty heavy, I mean, I feel pretty comfortable I could catch a grouper on it. And this is just an old Arsenal. I don't even know who, Shakespeare Arsenal. I mean, it's been in my boat. It's been very good. But now since I've seen this, I'm thinking I need to get into the 21st century. So on one of our lives, we had a rod completely ripped out of the boat. Matter of fact, here's what's left of that rod holder. And these had treated me good for 20 some years. And it ripped it off the boat and shot into the water 15 feet before it even touched the water. And that was the one we were waiting for. And I said, oh man, what am I going to do about this? You know, because I don't have a whole bunch of money to just go whatever. And luckily, Steve saw it. And Steve's like, we got to talk, son. You got to get rid of them things. But anyway, let's talk about strategy. We can talk about hooks and rods and reels till we're blue in the face, but if you're not on the right spot, if you're not in the right zone, let me explain it this way. I spent 2 or 3 years in the right area where big fish live, but just too far away from them to where my top end fish for those 2 years, and I fished it pretty hard. I used to spend nights on islands and stay there down below Alton on that first island for weeks. And my channel cat and flathead mentality, because I was already pretty good at that from the Midwest, my channel cat and flathead mentality kept me away from landing monsters from 50 to this. But once I figured it out, once I started contacting stuff, and my problem was I didn't have the right equipment to do it. I had Walmart style rods, 20-pound tests and 3-ounce egg sinkers, and I was using baits about this size from here to here. Now, there's nothing wrong with using small baits. I've caught lots of giant fish on small baits. But if you're using small baits in too shallow a water, you're trying to be comfortable. You're trying to anchor your boat in like a little bit slacker. Maybe the wind's not so bad. Maybe it's just really comfortable. It looks really cool. But that's not really where the fish are, in my experience. They're in the roughest, most horrible water that you could imagine. And I did not imagine giant blue cats in 4, 5, 6 mile an hour current. I didn't even imagine them in 2.5 mile an hour current, until I started targeting channel cats up tributary rivers where there are literally whitewater rapids, and here's giant channel cats in 3 foot of whitewater. Then I started thinking, wonder if these blues are in that super deep water. Wonder if they're in that stuff where, you know, and my electronics was terrible, literally terrible. It was like a Legend 2000. You couldn't hardly see anything on it, and everyone showed up like a hot dog. You know, there was no arch to it. There was no nothing, or I didn't know how to run it right. So I started to put it together once and I did not have the kind of anchor that is sold today. I had terrible anchors back then. I used to have to tie bricks to it. I had my regular anchor. I have to tie a big brick to it. And I had too skinny of a rope, and it tore up your fingers, and I kept working and kept working. You know, sometimes I was there for a week and my hands were so bad I didn't even want to shake anybody's hand ever for like the next week. But I wanted to do it so bad that I would do anything necessary to catch big fish. So I started learning where I'm going to be able to intercept these fish, not by accident, but by paying attention, by attrition, by keeping my mind open. And so I started using bigger baits, and I got a better anchor. I got better line. I got better rods. And then I started going to it. And then pretty soon I started catching stuff that was way better than what my biggest fish were before. 15, 20, 25 pounds. Now I started into the 30s and then into the 40s and then into the 50s. And I started thinking, okay. And I would still go down there at different parts. This gets a little complicated, but I'd start going down at different parts of the calendar year to figure out where and when these blues are. Because I suspected that they were highly migratory, and it turns out that I was actually right. In our northern section, the highest point you can expect to catch a blue cat is Keokuk, Iowa, because that dam just basically shuts them off. So I started fishing the lower stretch, the Alton and down to St. Louis. And I started to notice that in May, yeah, you can have some fish, but the water was so volatile that you never knew if you were going to go. It was going to be high water, medium water, or they're going to shut the water off. The population didn't seem to be as big, so I just fished it and fished it and fished it. And I basically came down to a calendar season between the first weekend of August and pretty much the last weekend of October as my best shot at catching big fish. So there's plan. I've got plan number one, plan number two. I got better rigs. I can do bigger stuff. I got a better anchor. Now, all of a sudden, I'm figuring out when these fish are available. So I would plan my vacation because by this time I'm older. I got responsibilities. I got a couple kids. I got to do all this stuff. And I'm like, man, I want to go fishing this week and I'm stuck. And I don't have any vacation and stuff like that. So I actually took a job promotion and threw that away and said, pay me less money. I just want 30 days vacation. And they said, okay. And I went, yes, to the detriment of my bills and everything else. So I stayed in a crappy little house. Not very expensive. My vehicles were terrible, but I had a boat. I could go fishing. So yes. All right. So now I'm starting to figure out that I'm going down there with no bait. Bait's volatile. You may have skipjack herring up there sometimes and sometimes not. It's not like the Tennessee River where they inhabit that area. There's little pockets of them above, and so I would have to spend time, and time is money. Money's time. I wanted to spend as much time as I could focused on my quarry. Now, everybody's not like that. I'm kind of a psycho, but in the meantime, I started fishing for flatheads, and I figured that out, and I don't know if we're even going to talk about that. Raise your hand if you want to talk about flatheads or giant blues. I just want to get a good gauge. Blues, raise your hand. Flatheads, raise your hand. All right, we'll try to talk about both of them. Steve, give me another half hour. All right. So, in the meantime, I had some flathead waters that I didn't really know I had because I didn't really realize that the Mississippi River was only an hour away. I was trying to fish other smaller tributaries, and I was maxing out at 25, 30 pounds, which for me at the time was pretty good, but I wanted to catch the big fish. So I got a map because there was no navionics. There was nobody at the bait shop that was going to tell you, hey, you need to go here and catch big flatheads. So I just had to go and kind of run amok. So I did. I ran amok. I used different rigs than what you're seeing here, but I learned an equation I kind of coined back in the late 80s. I started it with channel cats, and it lent itself well to flatheads and lent itself really well with blues. And that is current is first. If you don't have current, you cannot predict where the fish are. Now, I'm not saying that lakes are terrible because they're not, because you only have so many options. But if I have an option, I want to see the right current. Channel cats like decent, fast current. Flatheads like mediocre current. And blues like super fast with the depth. And I had to figure all that out. So it's current plus depth plus cover equals big fish. So that is a standard generic equation. Once I understood that I could formulate that from channel cats and catch the biggest channel cats in the river, go to flatheads, tailor it a little bit and catch the biggest flatheads in the river, and then go to blues and do the same thing, I was like, man, I'm onto something. So now I can go to pretty much any river as long as I have enough time to figure out its little idiosyncrasies. I can usually be on big fish pretty quick. And you guys can do it too if you want to. Just thinking about big fish mentality. And if I were to settle for fish like this and be happy with it, that's okay. But I'm not going to do that. If I'm catching a bunch of these, there's one of two problems. Either I'm not on big fish, or my baits are too small and there's too many of these running around. These are aggressive fish. These are big, slow, careful fish that do not have to feed every day. They don't. Those guys have to feed. They're pressured into feeding. These guys don't, because they can eat giant baits. They can eat very few baits as opposed to that. They've got to go and scrounge around and fight for stuff. This guy doesn't have to fight for anything. He can take a 2-pound Asian carp or a 10-pound common carp or that fish if he chooses. So I had to think on that scale. So I started, instead of just using Moon Eye, which Moon Eye is a great bait, instead of just using small skipjack herring, instead of using shad, instead of using that, I started catching those giant golden suckers like this. I mean, big bait. I call them donkey baits. And so this is a standard representation of the minimum bait I usually throw when I'm targeting big fish, big blues. This in real life, which I couldn't, I didn't ask Steve, but I just assumed I couldn't bring a live. I would have done it though. I would have done it. I would have brought a live one and cut that thing up right here with my electric fillet knife, blood all over the place, and said, hey, this is what I want to use. All right. So so we're talking about this. This is my representation of a skipjack herring. That's probably about the minimum I would use if I'm targeting big fish, which I normally do. And then this is my representation of a green sunfish. I'll use them smaller than this earlier in the year, but generally speaking, as the year progresses, I like to see them 6, 8 inches. I don't like to use live baits that are huge. So don't get that idea, because one of the things about flatheads, and we want to talk a little bit about those, is that flatheads can be frustratingly picky, even giants like this. And this is a representation of some of the bigger flatheads that I've boated. This is 55 inches, weighed about 85 pounds. Now, it wasn't a fluke. I've caught numbers of these and bigger ones on relative regularity at a time when I really focused on them, especially in the month of June, and that's pre-spawn. But that's neither here nor there, because we got some rigs to talk about. How much time we got? Half hour? Less? Oh, just keep rolling. All right. Okay, so one of the secrets that I learned on targeting big fish is I would do one of two things. I want to focus on a holding spot or a travel zone. And making the determination between those is basically when you go over a spot and you mark normal fish, this size here, and you don't really mark any of the big hippopotamuses, as we like to call them, donkeys, hippopotamuses, manatees, whatever, So, walrus, don't forget about walrus. I had to decide what made a holding area and what made a travel area. And a travel area is not necessarily a feeding area either. So I had to start to categorize that in my head. And basically, if you've got, and let me make this easy, if I had a PowerPoint presentation, it'd be real easy. I'll probably do that next time. So let's just say you've got a river that's got an average depth of 45, 50 foot. Your holes are 60, 70, 80. You've got some upper reaches up near the dam. You've got some stuff where it curves around a bend. You've got a deep ledge, and you start marking fish on that deep ledge, 30, 35, 40 feet during the day. And they're holding there. And you take a look at it, and you've looked at it yesterday, and you've looked at it the day after, and maybe you looked at it last week, and there's always fish there. Go back there at night, and they're gone. That is a holding area. That means they were resting. And big blues, who's seen them in Bass Pro? In the tank. And this is what they do. Either in place, or they just do this. And you can tell their attitude. Their attitude is like this. But I've seen big fish in tanks when they're aggressive. And I trained myself to look at a fish finder. I got a way better fish finder, by the way. And you can see their attitude if you really look close and you really recognize what's going on. You prove it to yourself time and time again. I've been able to take a look at a fish on a fish finder and say, if he's just straight And there's no, I mean, yes, you got to move into them right. You got to do all this stuff. But if you see them head down, tail up on a ledge, on a feeding ledge, I get excited. I'm like, oh, yeah, I see a 4-foot fish. I got a 5-foot fish on a feeding ledge. And he's 35 foot of water, and it dribbles off of 15, and the current's coming around, and you have a nice current seam and maybe a wing dike. I get excited about it. Now, I'm not always right, but most of the time when I do get excited about it, there's something going to happen. Something epic is going to happen. We're going to have rods go down. We're going to have rods ripped out of the boat. We're going to do something stupid. We're going to break nets, whatever. It's the greatest thing in the world. But let me get to my rigs. So, of course, I have better rod holders now because of Steve. All right. So this is, you can call it whatever you want. It's a homemade donkey weight, big weight, whatever you want to call it. And then I've got a down rig, which this consists of just a snap swivel right here. It's not all that big. A lot of people are scared of them. I'm not. Landed lots of huge fish with snap swivels. You just got to check, make sure it's right. So it's just tied straight to the end of the line. And I've got 50, it's actually 80-pound leader. And I've got this no knot snelled right here, approximately 2 foot up. So if I'm in an area, that is and we talked about the difference between a holding area and a feeding zone. If I'm marking fish in a holding area, a lot of times I will anchor up above them in the current seam and hope they come my way instead of go downstream. Most of the time they come my way, but not all the time. So I'm going to take one of these just out of the side of the boat, and I'm going to put our various donkey bait on it, and I'm going to try to keep it streamlined. I'm not going to like hook this sideways so it does a bunch of tumbling. I want to see this thing streamlined, and I'm going to jump down here in a minute and kind of show you the benefits of this. Now, a lot of people use what I'd say is a down rod. And let's say we've got, I've just plummeted it to the bottom. And just say there's 3.5 mile of current and 40 feet of water. There's a lot of places that I cannot go far enough and then cast back to them. Sometimes I can, like below dams where you're right at the line, or maybe there's a hard left swirl before the boat can stay consistent. And so I've got to anchor tight, throw back to the fish that I'm looking for back there. But there's also fish running underneath the boat. So I can't capitalize on that with a tiny, like a tiny 8-ounce sinker. Sorry, but it is a tiny 8-ounce sinker. So the big benefit to this is when you, Steve says beer. All right. So we've got this. I've lowered it below the boat, but there's so much pressure to it. I've got to shotgun that thing down with my big donkey bait so that it's not catching a whole lot of current. And what's going to happen is it's going to go straight down until the current catches up with it. Then it's going to bow. This whole thing's going to bow like this, which is fine. Now, this is an exaggeration, but I wish I had 40 feet. I should have put this thing up there. So you've got a bow like this. So if you're marking fish that are waist high up off the bottom, you might have to adjust this. You can't really hang it straight down because all it's going to do is this, and fish don't like that. For some reason, they just don't. So what I've done is if I tighten this thing up, it will stay about waist high. If I'm seeing them cruise along the bottom, all I have to do is let out a little bit, and that current will bow it like this, and it's kind of almost better because when that fish takes this bait, it's going to take it and it's going to pull it. It's got the bait, and then it starts to load up like this. Whether he goes underneath the boat or whether he goes out towards the main current or whether he goes up, it's a pretty good shot that we're going to get a good hookup. Jeez. Kevin did not tell me I can't do that. All right. So pretty much everybody knows if you're a cat fisherman, you mark your fish, you go up above them, anchor, try to remember where they're at, and then cast to them and hope they bite. Well, I kind of took that, did that same thing for many years. Then I got to thinking, why am I not catching more of the fish that I marked? How come am I not getting and I might mark 6 or 8 good fish and I catch 1 or 2. That's pretty common, even when I do now. But I increase stuff, and I actually found it on accident because the water was low on a couple of trips. And say this is the left side of my boat and the main channel's over there. And I'm on a current seam. I'm marking fish here, but then I take this rod on the corner, which is kind of it's kind of against a river fisherman's religion to do what I'm about to do. So we got current going this way, got the side of the boat here, and I'm going to take this, I'm going to throw a big giant donkey bait right like this. I'm going to throw my sucker, bleeding all over Sean because I've hung it all over the boat. I'm going to cast this thing 90 degrees, almost as far as I can. I'm going to cast it out into the main channel. Now, the conventional thought would be, that is the greatest way in the world to get a snag and lose your stuff. It is, but it's also a great way to catch giant fish. Hopefully I can demonstrate this. So I'm going to put this way out here. So I'm going to lock it down in the holder, but I'm not going to lock it down in the holder until I've let the current take this line. I don't use the clicker, I just do it by hand. So we've got all this current, and I let this thing bow. Seems ridiculous. I'm gonna let this thing bow, clear out to here. Because if I don't, all that's gonna happen is this bait is going to drag. Because if I try to keep it tight, it's just gonna drag, and it's just gonna swing like this instead of staying a chance of staying 90 degrees or 45 degrees or whatever. It's just gonna go back where my other rods are, especially because I fish fast current. Now, why do I do that? It's not necessarily to cover more water. It is. It's a good thing. But out there where I'm not is the main channel, where I really can't anchor. The barge traffic is heavy. We fish an industrial section of river. And if I anchored out there, I'm going to have to move every 10 minutes. But also, it also covers this next thing. So when that finally sticks, whether it sticks at 90 degrees or whether it sticks at 45 or at 22 and a half, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to be able to visit, and hopefully when it went out and hit the bottom and I let all that slack out, it bumps along the bottom until it finds something. It finds a ridge. It finds a little ledge. Sometimes it'll find a stick and a snag, and I always say this is either a fish or it's a loss. I mean, it's throwing it away or whatever, but sometimes you got to roll the dice and just, reach for the stars. So I learned how to do that, and what ended up inadvertently happening is it would find those creases and it would find those drops without me even having to look at it. And if I anchored over there, I wouldn't be placed correctly on it anyway. So just say the current's coming this way, and my boat's over here. There's no way I can just hang that bait, which I got almost all my baits out, over the ledge of that. And that's not an accurate representation. It would actually be the sinker. And this thing, if the current's coming this way, this is here, and that fish is hunkered down along that little trench or that ledge or whatever, and that smell's coming right to him. Or he's laying off of it. They love those little ledges, and you can't even hardly mark them on your fish finder, but they're there. You can feel them. But if I put that out there and it doesn't get a bite in 20, 30 minutes, I can pop it off and it'll move to the next ledge or the next home or the next whatever. So it's kind of like the slowest bumping you ever did in your life. Because these big fish are careful creatures. I was just talking to somebody today about I'm anti-bumping, but I'm anti-bumping for me, not you. I think it's great, whatever you want to do. But I'm anti-bumping because the majority of the time it's going to be this fish. Because these are the active fish. These are the big, careful fish that have lived a long, long time. They don't have to do anything except take up real estate, let their presence be known, wait until the little fish are done, or just move up on the little fish and eat them. Maybe this big, maybe this big. But let's just say, man, I could get really thirsty up here. So let's talk about this sideways thing. This sideways thing is weird because when you get a bite, it doesn't look like the normal bite. So this one's cast down in the current, and it's going to go like this. It's going to go down. This one never goes down. All it does is this. It could be an 80-pound fish, and that's all it does. Why? It does that because that fish has grabbed the bait, went downstream, and all you're seeing on the end of the line, telegraphed through a bunch of slack like this, is the sinker bouncing along the bottom. I kind of planned on going over there and showing you what that was. Let me reel it in a little bit, and then I'll show you what we got going. Turn my annoying clicker off. I got it, Kevin. All right. So if we are, got a little slack. And this fish has grabbed it from up here and is going downriver. All you're seeing is that. You're just seeing that right up there. And I tell Sean all the time, because it's usually on his side of the boat, pick that rod up, it's a big fish. He's like, what? Big fish? What are you talking about? I said it's a big fish because I saw the initial hit. And I told you I was going to tell you about that. So whether I'm in the boat, whether I'm watching somebody on shore, watching YouTube. Oh, Kevin, you the man. Okay. So I've learned to train myself to understand what a big fish looks like, the mechanics of it. Well, I know a lot of you guys do, and trust me, there's things I'm telling you already know. But when you see that first, here, let's go to this one. All right, so not as a down rod. Well, you can kind of see it as a down rod too. But when you see that original hit, boom. All right, what did this thing do to show you what's going on there? It went, poof. It didn't get nibbled, didn't get drugged. It got inhaled. That's the initial inhale, this one. Boom. And you'll see it. It'll travel up that line and you'll be like, oh, looks like a big fish. Not a guarantee because you can have really aggressive small fish and come in and do it. But the next move, if it's a small fish, it's going to go, it might go fast. Big fish almost never go fast. I could count on one hand how many fish over 50, and I don't think I've had any fish over 70 or 80 move super fast, unless I'm in like a weird situation. But most of the time it's that initial whoosh, and then it's the pull down that is slow. And it doesn't matter if it's flatheads or it's blues, it's usually like this. Flatheads will give you a hesitation like this, won't they? Little flathead to go squeak, squeak, squeak. Big flathead to hit it, boom. Sometimes it'll sit there. And you pick up the rod and you go, oh, is it a big fish or isn't it? So you had to see that initial hit to understand whether it's a big fish or not. And sometimes you can't predict it. You go, oh, it's 25 pounds or oh, it's 70. Depends on the spot you're on too. So once that fish goes down and the flatheads, I can tell you mechanically why that happens. unlike blues and channel cats, flatheads pivot right here. Blues do a paddle tail. Channel cats do a giant S movement. So channel cats are quick, so are blues, but they go like this. And usually a blue will inhale a bait and turn sideways because they're a creature of current. Flatheads back up a lot. They'll turn and go too, if they're, especially if they're very aggressive. But since they pivot right here, they swim more like a whale shark. Their head goes one way, their tail goes the other way. So every time they move like this, that's that hesitation when their head goes back the other way. And so you can tell if the pull, if this pull is 12 inches, you see that thing, you go, boom. And that first initial pull is 12 inches, it hesitates, and then pulls another 12 inches, you know, it's a 4-foot fish. You guys hear me all right? So that's pretty cool to know it's a 4-foot fish before you even touch the rod. I'm like, get that rod, it's huge, it's huge, it's huge. You know, and I get excited about that. Ooh, I better stay away from that. All right. We got 10 minutes for any questions. I could keep talking for another 4 hours. I've done it before. But we got to get other people in. Who's got a question?
I think you mentioned that you were talking about seeing fish on your left eye.
Yes.
And you said, I think you said, you won't see those big fish, you'll see the smaller active fish.
Well, what I was referring to, I will mark these, no doubt. But what I was referring to, as long as I was saying it right, sometimes I get a little confused up here. But if I'm seeing massive amounts of these in one area, I'm usually not seeing those. I'll have to find an area that's got less competitive biomass. And this is competition for that fish. They don't love that. They'll do it, but it's occasionally. I mostly find those giants off by themselves. Sometimes there's 3 of similar size. You know, that one right there is about 125 pounds, 130 pounds. And he might have another 80 with it, might have an 85, might have a 90, might have a 150 for all I know. But you don't often see. Now, you can catch these fish. You can catch this one first, 10 minutes later, catch that one. But if it's got a huge biomass of these popsicle fish, I usually don't find those. So I try. And it's not that you can't catch big fish almost anywhere. Everybody knows, we're all catfishermen. We've heard it. The Snoopy rod and the 70-pound flathead on Lake San Chris in March on a bass rod, but, you know, whatever, Mr. Twister. Fine. But to consistently target it, you got to figure out what works in your waters. Got to kind of tailor it to your own perspective. Pay attention if you want. If you want to go out there and have fun and rip lips and all that stuff, I think that's awesome. But who's next? Anybody got like a really zen question? Like a crazy zen one? Anybody? Where's Fishing Chick at? She always has questions. All right, so let's just talk about something else. I fish a lot of sunken barges, sunken ships. Now, I realize there's not a lot of sunken ships in everybody's water, but I figured it's kind of entertaining to talk about, so I will. I find some of these my favorite underneath sunken ships, beside sunken ships, beside barges, as long as it's in the current.
That for you.
If it's way out of the current, if it's like in the backwaters, I don't really find big fish. I'll find some small ones, but if I can find a sunken barge off of a ledge, I can find one out in the main channel. I can find one at the entrance of a secondary channel. That's the other thing. As long as I'm talking about big fish mentality, I could count on, I do not catch very many huge fish on what I call a tertiary, a secondary, or a tertiary. It's usually the primary, and the primary means it is the the first offshoot off the main river. It's got to have contact to deep water, even though like I've caught fish like that in less than 12 foot. A lot of them I catch in less than 20 foot, the flatheads. But the farther I get away from the main channel, the smaller the average or the likeliness is that I'm going to catch small fish. Okay, the habitat could look awesome. I could have I could go for like a mile and see like 6 feet of 6-7 feet of water. It's got decent current. All of a sudden it dumps into 20 with a giant root ball in the middle of it, and then it pops back up. That's perfect flathead habitat. But it's too far away from the main channel, except for at the height of the spawn. And once in a while I get that wrong. I go, oh man, I should have been fishing. I saw that shallow water stuff. I didn't want to fish it, but I should have, because I just didn't realize that spawn had moved up a week or back. And that's the problem with having a regular job.
A question from online. Do you think catfish communicate?
I know they do. And how do I know they do? One, I've heard it with my own ears. And two, there would be no other reason for a fish like this to make that noise that they do. I don't think it's a coffee conversation. I don't think they're telling jokes. But I think it's a warning. I think it's a proximity warning. I am about ready to attack you because you're crowding me. So they go, and they have that. I went to South America, and red tails have a shrill vibratory sound, and you could hear them underneath the boat through the water. I don't even want to copy it because it sounds so dumb, but it's this shrill thing where you hear one over here, and it's going off, and it's going off, and it's going off. And pretty soon underneath the boat, it's like a screaming cat fest, like when cats fight. And then all of a sudden they separate. So we know that fish that make noise can communicate very simple things. They're simple cortex creatures. And that's another thing I want to talk about as far as big fish mentality when chasing big fish, is the fact, don't give them too much credit. Don't give them our human. We're a bunch of mammals. We don't like heat. We don't like it too hot. We don't like it too cold. We tend to think of the porridge thing. We don't like too much wind. We don't like too much rain. We don't like it. These fish could care less. This fish could be sitting 300 yards away from a hot water discharge. It's like a sauna. It could be awesome. It'd be like summer, 87 degrees. He could be up in there. Yeah, it's party time, but he's not. He's 500 yards down or 2 miles up. He knows it's there. He's been past it. He knows, but it's not the timing for him. It's not his. It is not his instinctual nature. They don't have a thinking cortex. Matter of fact, flatheads are so primitive, you can't even hardly train them like you can a channel cat. A channel cat's actually the smartest one out of all three, believe it or not. I mean, sometimes they're the most annoying, but they are the smartest one. You can train them to do a few things. There's been studies, the Pavlovian dog response. You train them to where when you turn a light on, they wag their tail and they get up there. And, every farmer knows, and everybody does here, the truck goes down to the pond. They get the thing out, bang the pan, and here comes the channel cats because they know they're going to get fed. You can't do that with a flathead. I've tried it. There's other people have tried it. Flatheads are very primitive. So they're the most primitive, and this is a good way to think about this. Flatheads have the slowest and lowest gear metabolism out of the three. A channel cat has the highest metabolism, and a blue cat is somewhere in between. Channel cats, if you hold them in a tank and feed them as much as you can at 80 degrees, they will lose weight. They can't eat enough to sustain weight at that high of a water temperature because they're cold-blooded. And it revs their metabolism. I've never kept gigantic blues in a tank. I don't have that big of a tank, but I have heard from DNR guys that their metabolism is somewhere in between. Flatheads, on the other hand, don't have a problem maintaining their weight in cold or in heat. They don't really have to eat that much. So they can go long periods of time without eating. So I think of flatheads kind of like the desert, the camel. Doesn't have to eat that much. All he has to do is be tough and fight other flatheads for space. And food will come to him, and it's easy. So he's more concerned that this fish is going to come and crowd him when he's in his little home or his big home, however you want to put it. He's more interested in beating this fish up and maintaining his dominance on his real estate. It's his house. That's what he does. Little ones too, because they don't know how small or big they are. They all try it. So if you think about it, flatheads are probably the most self-limiting population of catfish that we have, because a little flathead wants to be where the big flathead is. So then therefore, by attrition, he ends up food. Little flatheads, run around, bam, you're done. It's over. And so that's why nobody ever hears really of a mature river or lake population that flatheads are just running amok, because they don't. And it also takes big fish to get big fish. Believe that or not, it sounds kind of backwards. A lot of guys think, well, you know, we got to eat some fish to make sure there's room for other fish to grow. And that is true to a point. But until you can put a big flathead in the prime locations, all the prime locations, these have to be able to fill out prime locations so that small fish or little Johnny fish that's not quite right tries to go into this area and he's eliminated out of the gene pool. Maybe he doesn't, maybe another fish doesn't have the ability to get this big. I believe in that. I believe that genetics are a huge thing when we're talking about catfish population, water, available prey fish. I mean, there's a whole lot of things going on, but and fish have indeterminate growth. So this fish is an old fish. I don't know of any place on the planet that grows fish this big in a real short amount of time, especially flatheads. Blues grow faster. Channel cats grow fast, but they all grow fairly fast to sexual maturity. And it's really complicated, and I really don't have enough time to go through all of that. But just remember that if you're going to want to target big flatheads, think in terms of how cool is his area? Is there enough current gonna bring food to him? Is it diverse enough? Can he get to shallows at night in a short period of time? Can he move down? Can he disguise himself? This is another cool thing. Let me show you. Okay, so let's just say this is, for all intents and purposes, it's 15 foot or 12 foot, and the river's going this way, and all of a sudden it dumps down into a hole like this. Flatheads will, and they do a lot, rest just like that. Got little Johnny bait fish coming down in the current. What happened? Boom, it's a great ambush spot. I've caught a lot of big flatheads on that top lip using that down rod situation where I can hold it. There's too much current. I can't, maybe I can't put my boat enough, but I can target that lip right here. I can have this little green sunfish or bluegill or anything alive, or even cut bait, and it's right here, and he is poised right at the top of that. He's got all kinds of stuff to rest, but he's moved up here to feed. And as long as I can target that back and as well as target this lip, I up my chances by almost double. Flathead success is not an easy thing. They get picky. The big fish, they kind of go dormant usually first. And we know this because I can fish spots that I fish day after day, and I know what lives there. And all of a sudden, if I'm in my primary spots and I'm contacting 5 to 12 to 20 pound fish, I got to assume he's either not there or not feeding. If it's a cold front and I had a rough time and only my little fish are, around the area, and I'm only catching them on the perimeter, say there's a whole tree in a 12-foot hole, and on the root ball, which is usually prime location, and I start catching little fish on the outside pretty consistently, and on this root ball, I'm catching fish from 30, 40, 50, 60 pounds. And then all of a sudden next week when I come and I throw into that root ball and I catch a 5-pounder, I know that the fish that's normally there isn't there, or it's sedentary, it's neutral, it's negative, so he's sitting back. So, by the way, that sideways thing works for flatheads too, to a certain extent. So if I'm set up on, let's just say my mass of rods here is the top of the tree, and then like here, maybe it's short tree, just display purposes. And I've got the root ball. It's laying in perfect location. You got a little bit of current going into it, 8, 9, 10 foot of water. And say the ledge, like I described to you like that, extends this way a little bit. I can target this tree, but then take one and flip it out on the side, and it will dribble down and possibly get into an area where I can attract a big flathead. Kevin just signaled to me, oh, fishing chick.
What if you don't have big root balls? It's just sand, real shallow, fast moving water, and just a few sand bars.
Tim,
That
I'll ask
technique
your
works
question.
too. You kind of have to hit a lot of water because it's really difficult if all your stuff looks the same, like a washboard. So sand has a tendency to get pushed by current up into sand dunes like this. Okay, so there's a trough of slower water, and the faster water tumbles over top of it like this. And those flatheads will sit in there like that. They'll sit in there like this. And so how do you target those? Throw out to the side, let it dribble, dribble, dribble till it gets caught. And hopefully you're either on the top side, here's your trough, top side here, or back side here. And if you can do that, and if you don't get bit with a flathead, 5-10 minutes, pull it up, and let it go to the next one, because it's really difficult. Both. I used to fish dams for flatheads quite a bit, which had huge humps. Sometimes I'd have to anchor sideways to a hump that's off to the left or off to the right, because I could mark them on the front, but I couldn't accurately position the boat and like get them exactly to it. So I'd get sideways, throw out sideways, and it'd get caught on the front, and it wouldn't take 5 minutes. Boom, 40-pound flathead. Boom, 25. Boom, 50. But it almost never goes the other way around. Never goes 50, 40, 25, unless you're fishing structure like this, because then they take the primary aggressive spot. It's kind of a cool thing when you can go into a root ball, anchor up, tell your customer, your friend, don't even set this in rod holder because it's going to be 5 minutes. That's pretty cool. Hand them the rod. Just hold on to it. It's going to go down. Don't get overexcited. Don't jerk the rod like it's a bass. I guided for a lot of years, so I know what I'm talking about on this. So I've cast this thing to that root ball. I got my little Johnny bait fish. It's going like that. And he's holding the rod going, really? Boom. And it's on. I mean, it's really cool when that happens. It doesn't always happen, but there'll be trends where the big flatheads are sitting in predictable locations, and then it's easy. You're a hero, a rock star. It's the greatest thing in the world. And then when the cold front comes in, bam, now everything I just said happened yesterday. Now I got to refigure it out. We all know that.
We got one more question from online. Do you endorse circle hooks for flatheads?
Yes, I do. As a matter of fact,
after this question, y'all, we have to move on, but Tim will be available for any other questions off to the side here. So
I will.
answer that one for online, and then we'll wrap it up.
I'm glad you guys asked me that.
Good job,
because I
Tim.
recently found a hook that I'm by design, and this is not the advertisement section of this. I bought this pack because I think this design is a little bit better than this. The one thing I like about flatheads and circle hooks is as long as my circle's not too round, I can kind of set the hook. Let me kind of demonstrate that a little bit.
I won't be able to get to your question, buddy.
All right, so I've got this set in the holder. Say I'm either on great cover or I've just thrown it in kind of an area and it's in the no man's land. I get that first bump, boom, like this. What's it doing? Nothing. Because he's already home. He ain't doing nothing. He's got it held in his mouth. Let me get this. He's got it held in his mouth. Sometimes by the head, sometimes by the belly, sometimes the whole thing. But how do I know when to set the hook? Back in the old days, we would wait on them. And you got a J hook. So we all know what happens then. You get 25% of your fish done swallowed it. And you're like, oh man, why, you know, it was kind of fun back in those days to pick up a rod like this. But I really do like the circle hook because I can pick that up after that and I can seesaw this thing. Or I can balance it. This is kind of a heavy rod for that. I don't normally use heavy rods like this for flatheads. But if he moves a half an inch, just kind of backs up. I know he's there, so I know I got to stay engaged with this flathead. And with a circle hook, a modified circle hook like this is actually a Team Catfish. It was originally a Daiichi Circle Chunk Light, and now it's the double action hook. But I've since found these Rip and Lips hooks, which are a little bit thinner, they're a little bit thinner wire, and they're very strong. So I think it's going to be able to go into a bait fish without that giant penetration. And you know, I think it's going to be a lot nicer because I don't have to have as much contact force with a circle hook. And you see me back up like this, I almost never come up with a rod like this, unless they're already down. I'll come up with the rod right out of the holder. If that thing's already smoked it down, I'll come right up with it like this. But with a flathead that's being kind of tentative, I'll sometimes give them line like this and then feed him down, especially if they've been dropping baits. Because I might have been on another spot, had them drop baits on me. I hate that. Do not like that at all. It drives me nuts. I'm like, okay, we got big fish because you see the thing and you want to pick it up. And I've started to call it the Shaolin Hook Set because it's something I used to do all the time with channel cats. Now I put it to flatheads. So when that flathead comes down like this, I'll pick that up almost in shotgun fashion. I'll pull back and sideways like this. And most of the time, it'll be hooked. Most of the time. All right. I think that's all the time I've got.
Everybody, please give Tim a round of applause. He has a YouTube channel called Epic Catfish on YouTube, and he always does things like this. And then him and Sean, they always go out and try to catch giant catfish, and most of the time, they're very successful at it. So check that out, Epic Catfish on YouTube. Thanks, Tim. We appreciate you. And then if you have any other questions, I'm sure after he's done breaking down, he'll be available to take those from you.
And I want to say one thing. Thanks, everybody, for coming. I love the fact you guys are enthusiastic about catfish. I love the fact that you guys came here and you get to see all this cool stuff that everybody's making these days. I think it's awesome. And I think I need to get in the 21st century because I got old stuff. And, you know, I got some new stuff and I really like it. So happy shopping.
Go buy some stuff.
I'm going to go buy some stuff.
Go buy some new gear.
All right.
I don't get to take that home.
Let's go
That's
buy
awesome.
some
Are
gear.
these yours?